We're in the eighth in this series on the ultimate basis of creation science. And one thing that has been the emphasis, I think, of all of Genesis chapter 1 has been insight into the God that we have committed ourselves to. And it tells us all kinds of things about the God of the Bible. And one of the main things it tells us, as I've been emphasizing in every one of the sessions, is that there's a sharp distinction between God and everything else. In the beginning, God. So God is distinct, God is separate, and there's nothing to compare anything in the created realm to God except one thing. He has chosen to create man in His image, so there's something in man that reflects something of who God is. But even before we get to day 6, we've seen a lot of other attributes, or what I prefer to call perfections of God, that in fact tell us a lot about Him. One of them, by way of introduction, is an attribute we call His self-existence. Now you may not have heard that because it's not commonly taught, but the Bible is clear on this idea. And it's not stated overtly in Genesis chapter 1, but we can see it just by way of implication. And what this concept is, God's self-existence, means that God has no need for anything at all. So He had no need to create a universe. This was a choice, this was a decision that God made to create all things that ultimately would end in the creation of man. This was His design, His choice. So this has far-ranging implications, and I'd like to start with this because we're going to talk about this creation mandate. In other words, why did God create man in the first place? Why are we here? And I think we have some of the essential, basic reasons that God created mankind. Everything else that we've looked at in the prior 5, and in fact, part of day 6, has led up to man, and now this creation mandate, sometimes referred to as the cultural mandate, tells us and gives us the basis for why God created. But we start with the idea that God had no need to create us. He has no need for us to function within that creation mandate, but He has chosen to utilize mankind just simply because He loves us and simply because He desires that of us. So it's a tremendous privilege to be able to do the things that He tells us in Genesis chapter 1. So we want to look at that concept and what we mean by this self-existence. God has no need of anything. No need for the creation, no need for animals, no need for mankind. So He has no need for our service. He has no need for us to fulfill anything. He's given us a calling, He's given us a purpose, but it's all a tremendous privilege to be a part of what God has designed in the universe that He has created. Self-existence also refers to Him being uncaused. Everything in the universe has a cause. Everything has a beginning and something that precedes it. God does not. In the beginning, God, again. He's self-sufficient. That means He doesn't need anything. There's no needs in God. And because He has no needs, He has no need for the creation. He has life that is independent and separate. Everything is derived from God, including life. We're given life. Now, we're going to talk about everything being derived from Him. That's an implication not only of Genesis 1, but of the creation mandate itself. In other words, everything comes from Him. All good gifts are from the Father of lights, as James says in James chapter 1, including life. He has life that is separate, that is distinct, that is independent of all life, but He's granted other life as well. And He's totally independent. That's what it means to be self-existent. So I think that's the starting point to understand, to have a biblical perspective on our part in God's creation and actually our purpose. And I think our ultimate purpose is to bring glory to God. through all the things that we do. And that'll be the focus of everything that I try to do this evening. So from that beginning, and here's one of the biblical passages. There's some in the Old Testament in Acts 17:25, where Paul to the Athenians is talking a lot about God to pagan philosophers. One of the things he says, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything. In other words, God has no need for anything. He is self-existent. Since he himself gives all people life, in other words, life is derived, comes from him, his life is self-existent, and breath, and all things. So all things are derived from him. That's what we're going to look at. And I think this is implied in the creation mandate. Therefore, he is sovereign over all things. Psalm 115:3, for our God is in the heavens, and he does whatever he pleases. Now, I'm glad to see we have some young people here. Kids like to do whatever they please. Well, we always have constraints. We always have boundaries. God has no boundaries. He does whatever he pleases because he's God. So that's God's self-existence. Genesis, I've been using this slide, is probably the most important book ever written. At least that's what Henry Morris thinks, and I would agree with him. And hopefully tonight you'll see one of the reasons for that, or many reasons for the significance of Genesis. I think we've been seeing that as we've been looking at each of the 6 days of God's creation. And then there's obviously the 7th day of rest. Just to kind of bring us up to date, if you haven't been here before, day 1, God creates light. We spoke of one of the main implications is that God is distinct from the creation and separate. He's transcendent. So there's a creator-creation distinction right off the bat. God is speaking things into existence. I emphasized that when we spoke of day 1. The very first thing that it's mentioned on day 1 is, and God said. So God speaks everything into existence. That's supported by Psalm 33, other passages elsewhere. Day 2, he separates the waters. We talked about some of the first issues in science. What did that mean? The separation of the waters. Some of the implications of that have far-reaching implications in terms of science. The stretching out of space. Russ Humphreys likes to call it the fabric of space. Day 3, land masses and the origin of life. Distinct kinds, and we made the big point that there are a lot of details in the text that basically tell us that evolution is not true. So we dealt with that issue on day 3 in some detail. Day 4, the heavenly bodies. And because the sequence is totally out of sequence in terms of humanistic thinking or naturalism, we saw that it refutes not only progressive creationism, and I tried to give you a lot of reasons why that is refuted, along with all of the other viewpoints except for a literal approach to Genesis chapter 1. Day 6 also, it prioritizes God's work. We talked a little bit about that concept. Day 5, flying and water creatures. Refutes evolution, some more detail in that area. And then last time we looked at the first part of day 6 where God created land animals and man. And the emphasis of that, I even hinted at last time, is we have the purpose for all of creation. It ultimately culminates in mankind. So that kind of gives you a summary and also some of the main implications that we've been looking at when we come to Genesis chapter 1. The outline here, this is on your outline sheet that was handed out, and I will be following this, and it'll be on the screen. If you haven't turned to Genesis 1, you might do that. We looked at verses 24 and 25 for day 6, creation of land animals. So there's a 2-part creation on day 6. Then we have the creation of man in the image of God, and that was the main focus of verses 26 and 27. We dealt with the issue of that divine counsel. Let us make man in our image. God speaking as not just one, but at least a hint of multiplicity. laying the groundwork for ultimately what would be developed in other passages, particularly the New Testament, concerning the whole idea of God being Trinitarian. So we looked at verses 26 and 27. A summary of that in terms of man in the image of God. He has a physical aspect to him. So there are similarities between the animal kingdom and mankind, but the differences are so drastic that there's a discontinuity between mankind and the rest of the animal kingdom. Just as there's a huge discontinuity between God and all of the rest of creation, so also is there a discontinuity between man and the rest of the animal kingdom. But he does share a physical aspect. We looked at that. But the main aspect of man is the immaterial aspect of who we are. So we are physical, but we have that immaterial aspect. We talked about a lot of dimensions in that. We have volition. That's part of the image of God. God makes decisions. God chooses. And He's given us the ability to choose, given us volition. He's given us a nature that is rational. We can reason. We can think. We can communicate, the whole rational realm. These are all aspects of the image of God. There's a moral aspect. There's a right and a wrong. There's absolutes. And He's put in man the ability to make choices, rights and wrong. So there's a moral aspect. There's a spiritual aspect. That aspect in terms of relating to God, that's part of the image of God. And what we'll look at this evening, there's a regal aspect. In other words, He's given us an opportunity to subdue and rule. That's the second aspect of the creation mandate. So we have that regal aspect or sovereign aspect. That's another aspect of the image of God. God is sovereign over all things. He's granted to us, or the original mankind, to have some sovereignty over planet Earth. Now, there was a change as a result of the fall, or some changes. We'll discuss a little bit about that. But He's given us basically some of His sovereignty to exercise on the planet. So day 6 deals with the creation of the animals and the creation of man. And then verse 28 introduces us to the purpose of mankind, which we will look at. There are two aspects to this creation mandate. So in verse 28, God blessed them. Now in Scripture, when God blesses, the idea is that He bestows upon man something. And I think in this context, He's bestowing upon man all of the capability to be able to fulfill His purpose and His calling and all that He's going to mandate in the creation mandate. So this blessing is a bestowal of capability, ability, and all the resources that man needs in order to fulfill what God has called him to do. And there's two aspects to this creation mandate. The first part is the fruitfulness, and that's summarized in 3 phrases here. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." So in that aspect, we have all that God has designed in terms of marriage and family. So one of the most important aspects and purposes of mankind is in developing the whole concept of family and the marriage relationship. Children, obviously, this is how the earth is to be filled, and this is how man is to multiply. Now, I'm not going to get into some of the details, but there's some distinctions between the creation of mankind in terms of man and the animals that are evident in this area.